Well, I'm Dr. Marvin Dunn. I was born in Florida in Volusia County in 1940. I'm old enough to have had to sit in the back of the bus. I'm old enough to have gone to segregated schools in Florida. I'm old enough to have had to enter white people's homes through the back door. My parents, my dad was a migrant worker. He took us, the whole family, on the migrant trail to work as migrants in New York, picking potatoes in the summer. After 3 years of doing that, by 1951, my father was able to purchase a home in Miami. These homes were available to Black veterans. And so we moved to Miami in 1951 when I was 11 years old. I finished high school early and went to Morehouse College out of the 11th grade. This was 1957. I was on a Greyhound bus heading to Atlanta to go to college. My parents had put me on this bus that Sunday night on the back seat and gave me a little brown bag lunch and said to me, "Don't you move off this back seat until this bus gets to Atlanta tomorrow afternoon." And the bus takes off Sunday night. And by the time the bus got to Fort Lauderdale, I moved to the middle of the bus and rode the rest of it. It felt better somehow. It felt better sitting in the middle of that bus, but white people were getting on that bus and sitting behind me now. By the next morning, there was a group of white, we were now in Waycross, Georgia, heading to Atlanta. And a group of white high school kids got on that bus. And a white girl sat down next to me. They were chattering, sat down right next to me. You could hear a pin drop on that bus when that child sat down next to me. I had never been that close to a white person. And finally, one of the white men behind me said, "Nigga, get up. You know you don't belong up there. Get back where you belong." And there were Black people in the back seat who were sort of nodding in. "Come on, you need to move." And a white Marine in uniform, a corporal, stood up and asked, "Why are you all bothering him? He's not bothering. Why are you all on him?" And once that man started defending me, they forgot about me. "You must be a nigger lover. You must be a Jew. You must come from the North. You don't understand how we do things here." So the bus driver, we're now outside of Waycross, pulls the bus over at a gas station. He walks back to where I'm sitting. He points his finger at me and says, "You were creating a disturbance in this bus. I'm putting you off." And that man gave me my little cardboard suitcase and put me off at that gas station and said, "Wait for the next Greyhound bus to Atlanta," which came by in about 3 hours. And I took that bus and went on to Atlanta. I will leave it to you to guess where I sat when I got on that bus in Waycross. I took my behind to that back seat that my mom and dad had told me and rode over to Atlanta. But that was a very frightening experience for me. I was by myself. I was 16 years old, going to college, never been away from home by myself. And then to be accosted on this bus was just an unbelievable experience. In any case, I completed Morehouse College in 1961, and I joined the Navy. I wanted to be a naval officer. It's a long story behind that, but in the process of trying to become an officer, I had some difficulty just getting through let me just say what happened. I joined the Navy. I was interested in going to officer candidate school. You had to have a college degree to do that. And I was inducted in Jacksonville. I went to Jacksonville on a bus with a bunch of white recruits. I was the only college graduate. So they put me in charge of this group. And we went to Jacksonville to the induction center from Miami on a bus. We get to the induction center around closing time. And the 12 white guys who were with me, they called them up, each one came up, and they gave them a paper that let them go across the street to the White Hotel at the Navy's expense to stay until the next morning and come back. When they were all gone, they called me up. And they gave me, they call them chips, to go to a colored hotel across the railroad track. I protested, but we're closing the office, take it up tomorrow. So I walk across the railroad track, and I go to this place that really was a house of prostitution. It was a rundown place. People drunk on the porch. I went into the kitchen to be given dinner, and there were roaches and flies in the food, so I didn't eat dinner. I went up to my bed and I had bed bugs. You could see them crawling in the seams of the pillow. So I didn't sleep. I sat up all night. The next morning, I went down for breakfast in the same nasty kitchen, so I didn't have breakfast. So I went back to the induction center, back across the railroad track, and took the exam for officer candidate school, and I failed. And the petty officer, who was sort of over the process, called me up almost gleefully. He said, "You're the one that's going to OCS, become an officer, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "No, you're not. You failed the test. You're going to go to Great Lakes with the rest of these dummies you brought in here." And they put me on an airplane with the rest of these guys, and they flew me to Great Lakes, Illinois. I was a seaman recruit. Before I left, I said, "I really would like to make a written complaint about this." So they called an officer in, and he asked me what happened, and I told him. He said, "Jacob," he said to me, "That's where Donna Washington stays when she comes to town. There's Louis Armstrong used to stay. Nobody's complained about this before." So I said, "Put it in writing," and I did. And they put me on a plane, and I went with the rest of them to Great Lakes. And near the end of my training, this limousine pulls up with a flag on it. It was a base commander's car, and sent over to get me. I was taken to the base commander's office. I go in, and he had the letter that I'd written in Jacksonville in his hand. And he said, "You complained about the test in Jacksonville. The Navy's going to give you another opportunity to take the officer candidate school test in the morning," which I did, and I passed. And with that, I was able to go on to officer candidate school and become an officer in the Navy. I spent 6 years as an officer. I was on aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers, incidentally, can take about 5,000 men on board to run those ships. About 1,300 of those men are officers. Guess how many Black officers were on the 2 carriers that I served on? Just me. That was a very lonely experience. Being number one, being the first one is overrated, because often you end up isolated. When my fellow officers would hit the beach for to go on, and nobody would say, "Marlon, hey, come on, go with us." They left me behind on the ship. They didn't really know how to handle me. I got along better with the stewards and cooks than with anybody. They knew what I liked, and I got along much better with them. I got out of the Navy. I loved being in the Navy. I was on the bridge of these aircraft carriers. At age 9, I was crawling in the dirt picking potatoes on Long Island, New York. And by age 25, I was driving an aircraft carrier in the Pacific Ocean. So when people say things haven't changed, no, that's not true. Things have changed, not enough. In any case, the Navy had, when I was in the Navy, had 0.004% Black officers on ships, virtually invisible Black officers. They had Black doctors and Black lawyers and Black supply officers, but not on fighting ships. That was very, very rare. So in June of 1963, our carrier, I was on the carrier Kitty Hawk, operating off San Diego, got the message that President Kennedy was going to visit our ship and stay overnight. You should have seen the Navy go crazy. All the practicing we did to be ready for the president, the jets flying over, the submarines coming up, the missiles going off, all we practiced for a month for Kennedy's arrival on the ship. He was to arrive at noon. They were bringing him out by helicopter from San Diego. The ship was about 200 miles out to sea. And they put me on the bridge when Kennedy was going to be on the bridge, which I thought, that's where I get to see the president. I was very excited about that. But Kennedy was late. He was late. And my watch was over. And my watch is over. I was on 3 other officers, and my time on the bridge was over. So as you leave the bridge, you say to the captain, permission to leave the bridge, sir, what the other 3 officers did. And I go up to the captain and ask permission to leave the bridge. And he said, "No, Lieutenant, you will remain on the bridge." I didn't have anything to do. They wanted me on that bridge when Kennedy came up. And sure enough, the president comes on the bridge. This is June of 63, sits in the captain's chair in agony. You could tell the man his back, as you may know, was a problem for Kennedy, injuries during the war. So you could tell that he was very, very uncomfortable. His doctor was with him. He was sitting in the captain's chair, bringing one admiral after another general, and all these people coming up to meet the president. He was hardly paying attention. And I was standing maybe 10 feet from Kennedy. And just for a few seconds, our eyes locked. And I'd never seen such deep, blue, painful eyes. I didn't speak to him, he didn't speak to me, but in those 3 or 4 seconds that we looked into each other's eyes, I had the feeling that he and I were the only ones who did not want to be on that bridge. But that's why I got out of the Navy. I felt the Navy was using me, and the Kennedy incident was the reason I really decided to go into psychology and get out of the Navy. So I was on another aircraft carrier by this time, operating in the Mediterranean. And I sent an application to enter the psychology doctoral program at the University of Florida in Gainesville. I wanted to get my doctorate from my home university. So I sent out my application to Gainesville. And about 2 or 3 months later, I get a letter. I think I have it someplace still. Dear Lieutenant Dunn, the University of Florida does not accept Negroes in its graduate program in psychology. However, the state of Florida will pay your tuition at any institution outside of Florida to which you may be admitted. Here I was in uniform, serving my country on a warship, and Florida writes me back and says, you can't come here. Now, that was 1966. Incidentally, let me just to close out the Kennedy, that incident was in June of '63. In November, he was dead. So that gives a time frame for the president's visit to our ship. In any case, I had also applied to the University of Tennessee, and I was accepted. Full ride, no tuition. We paid everything that I had to have in terms of tuition and what have you at that institution. So today, when the University of Florida and the University of Tennessee play anything, I root for Tennessee. When I finished at Tennessee, I came back home to Florida, to Miami. I became a school psychologist for about 2 years. I couldn't stand it. I worked in Black schools. My job was giving IQ tests to Black kids, and it was a miserable job because the tests were not fair to these kids, and it affected where they could go in school. Let me give you one example. One question on the IQ test you ask a kid, what is the thing to do if your mother sent you to the store to get a loaf of bread and the grocer told you he didn't have any? Now, if the child says, I will go to another store, you get 3 points for that. Or, some other answer, you get 2 points. Black kids that I asked that question to, almost all of them gave the same answer. I'll go back home and tell my mama. My mother wanted me just wandering around the neighborhood trying to find a loaf of bread. I send you someplace, you go there, you come back. So Black kids were losing points for giving the answer that was culturally correct for them. And then other examples of giving these tests made me feel that I really did not want to do this. And I moved more towards active community psychology, taking on projects in the community that I thought needed to be addressed. Among the things I started to do was to put gardens in the inner city on vacant lots with students. My students were they were in a state university, had no idea about the Black community, would never go into Liberty City or Overtime because they were frightened. Most of my students were Hispanic. So I would take them on, I gave them the opportunity on weekends. They could choose, they could come to Overtown, to the gardens, we were just planting gardens alongside the expressway. I didn't ask. We just started putting them in. And vacant lots that were used for drug, we just started planting on them. And our students had a choice. You could come to the community gardens and work for 3 weekends during the term, or you could give me a term paper of 50 pages or more. So over the course of doing that 10 years, I think I had 3 kids do the paper. And they were all pregnant. I was able to bring kids from FIU into Overtown, clearing up lots, putting in gardens. We first started planting botanical gardens in the community. Were beautiful. There was not a speck of grass in Overtown. You didn't find grass. Concrete, rock, you didn't find grass. So we started putting in botanical plants. And one morning had about 50 students out there working, and some guys half drunk by 10 o'clock in the morning on the other side of the street leaning against a pole. Hey, why don't y'all put in something we can eat? I thought that's not a bad idea. So we started planting collard greens and lettuce and carrots and potatoes and all kinds of things in an open field, no fence. Um, and people didn't bother that stuff. That garden was so beautiful that it was where the police took breaks. They just drive up and just park, but and just use that space for what it was intended. So I did that over a number of years, and then when the 1980 riot happened in Miami, that's another story. My interest turned to Black history, because I found in preparing a book about that riot that there was very little Black history about Miami. I was trying to explain what happened in 1980 and why this event was so painful and difficult for the community, but there was very little Black history. So I moved to write a book about the history of Blacks in Miami. That book is entitled Black Miami in the 20th Century. It is the only comprehensive book about the presence of Blacks in Miami that exists today. It cannot be taken into a Dade County school today. If a teacher has that book in his classroom, they need to get it out, because that book discusses institutional racism in Miami. It talks about how every institution, the police, the economy, political, even religious, every institution was racialized in Florida, in Miami. And I say that in that book. And I point out to incidents of racial violence and such. So that book now, with the new DeSantis Stop Woke Act mess, cannot be safely brought into a classroom. Hold on. My next venture in terms of writing was a book on the history of violence, racial violence in Florida. That book is a history of Florida through Black eyes. So I started in the 1990s, late 90s, going around Florida to places where racial violence had taken place on a large scale. And that took me to all kinds of locations in Florida, including eventually to Rosewood, where the 1923 massacre took place. In 2008, I and a white guy partner purchased 5 acres of land in Rosewood, pristine land, untouched since 1923. It's gorgeous. Rosewood today is a rural community, gentrified, 5-acre lots, all white. And I'm the only Black person today who owns land in Rosewood. I went to Rosewood, I think the first time in 1997. I was on a conference in Gainesville. Rosewood is directly west of Gainesville. If you all know that, most folks don't know that. But that Sunday, I drove out to, where is this Rosewood place? I drive west on Highway 24. Eventually, about 45 minutes or so, I see a sign, Rosewood. Nothing ever but a Baptist church and the J.W. White house. Mr. White and his wife were the ones who protected Blacks during the event, and their house still stands in Rosewood. So that Sunday, I make the first left turn I could make onto this clay road, and it ended at a cul-de-sac. And I get out and I look through the woods and I see this green tunnel coming through the woods, and I realized that was the railroad track that the train used to evacuate people during the massacre. So I started walking down this railroad track, and I see a graveyard, I see tombstones. I wander over there and I found the Black cemetery. It's now my private property. I was trespassing. I was just trespassing. And now it was getting dark, starting to drizzle, getting rainy. And I started back to my car and I got scared. I realized I was out there by myself, and something had happened to me. That was just, no one could ever know what happened to me. I got frightened. Rosewood that first time, rushed back to my car. But the scene, the tunnel, stayed with me. So some years later, 2008, I found a piece of property that had a part of that railroad still intact. The rails were gone, but the railroad bed was still there. And I and my partner purchased those 5 acres in 2008. My reason for doing it was just to preserve those 5 acres so that this now gentrified, all white Rosewood community would have at least one spot where Rosewood was preserved as it was when this massacre happened. Now I'm taking groups of students up to Rosewood. Our second trip is this coming weekend. I now take what we're calling Teach the Truth tours to these places I've studied and documented these things happen. These tours consist of a 56 passenger busload of kids. Each child has the high school student who travels with a parent or a grandparent. And we take them, all expenses paid. All expenses paid. Only the grown folks have to buy their food. But we take them to an overnight trip to Rosewood or to some other place. Well, Rosewood is always on the stop, but there are other places in addition to Rosewood that this tour goes to. Ocoee, for example, Live Oak, for example. But we end up in Rosewood all the time. So that's the purpose of the tours, is to have kids with their parent or grandparent walk that budded ground. And when we did this for the first time this past January, right there for the 100th recognition of the Rosewood event, now I took a busload of kids up there with parents and grandparents. Others were on the bus as well, but most of them were parents with kids with parents or grandparents. They cried. You know, just to be able to walk on that railroad track, people were moved to tears. So the question becomes, well, now, is that bad? You know, if people standing there wiping tears, is that, no, it's not bad. Bloody history ought to make you feel bad, ought to make you feel sad. Shouldn't make you feel angry. Shouldn't try to blame somebody else for what happened 100 years ago. But the emotional experience of walking on land where the blood was shed, where the ancestors suffered, brings a connection somehow to a lot of people, not just the Black folks who are out there. So we're going to continue those tours. We're going to be doing them with higher institutions of higher education, including the University of Florida, we hope. And that's my path going forward. I'll stop talking now because I probably took up most of the time we had set aside for this.
This is great. Now, can you just tell us a little bit more about the significance of all you have done in Black history and our plan for this roundtable to document the Black presence in Alachua County?
The importance of it? Yeah. Is that your question?
The significance, yeah.
The significance of it is that it's dangerously at risk of being lost. Listen, the kinds of things that I documented, the lynching of 15-year-old Willie James Howard in 1944 in Live Oak for writing a love letter to a girl. That boy was buried, lynched at the girl's father and 2 other men, buried in an unmarked grave and forgotten for 4 decades. These efforts on my part are intended to save this history, because our history, our violent history, is the easiest part to be lost because a lot of folks do not want to confront that reality, that history.
Thank you. What would be your advice to us just trying now to document our history in Alachua County?
What do I advise?
Yes.
I think it's time for activism. I really do. I think it's time to do more than just, well, let's all go out and vote. I think we need to have public demonstrations that what is happening in Florida to education is absolutely unacceptable. And if we try to do that from our desks at home, I'm not sure that's going to be that effective. I think people need to see us in the streets peacefully, organized peacefully, whites, Black, Jews, all of us saying this is not right. So I guess that's my view is let's get out in the street peacefully and demand change in Florida.
Thank you so much. If you have any additional comments you want to make for us before we leave?
just a couple of things about it. I don't know. I haven't delved that much into Alachua County history, but you had some mentions there too. And one of the problems that you had in Alachua County after the Civil War was that so many Black Union soldiers mustered out of the army in Alachua County, which you all know. I'm telling you, through history, which you know. But the fact that there were so many Union Black soldiers in Alachua County was one of the reasons that your county was one of the most stable counties during Reconstruction. You had Black people in power who could offer some protection that was not available to other counties, Blacks in other counties at that time. So I've already appreciated that about Alachua County. You always had a good, strong Black presence since the Civil War. At some point, I'd love to have you come over to my property and maybe bring some of your students over for a visit.
Yes,
we can work that out. Let's keep in touch. Let's keep in touch.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, bro. I appreciate you.
Okay. Have a good day.